Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 77 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending November 17th, 2017, the Home for the Holidays edition. In this episode, Jay Rosen and I return for a wide-ranging discussion of some of the top FCPA compliance and ethics-related stories of the week, including the 5th anniversary of the DOJ SEC FCPA Guidance. We consider the Wal-Mart announcement that it has reserved $283 million to settle its outstanding FCPA matter. We discuss the exploration of shareholder activism and the structure of a corporate compliance program in the context of corporate governance. We take a look at the ongoing FIFA trial in New York, which has featured anonymous jurors, threats against witnesses by defendants, and claims that Fox Sports paid bribes. We explore Mike Volkov's 4-part series on putting ethics back into corporate culture. We talk about the guys over at Resonate Pictures, Marc and Bryan Belknap, and how they can expand your compliance training classroom. We ask if there'll ever be another corruption conviction of a U.S. politician in light of the hung jury in the Menedez mistrial, which was granted earlier this week. We take a look at the 2017 SEC report on its whistleblower program. We discuss the highlights of my monthly podcast series of 1 month to a more effective compliance program. In the month of November, I'm considering a 360-degree view of communications to enhance your compliance program. We talk about the recently released, indeed this week released, ebook by the Everything Compliance Gang of Jay Rosen, Jonathan Armstrong, myself, and Matt Kelly of our individual reflections on the recently concluded SCCE 2017 Compliance and Ethics Institute. Came out this week. It's available for download for free on JD Supra. All of that is detailed more fully in the show notes. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and welcome to This Week in FCPA, episode 77 for the week ending November 17th, 2017, the Home for the Holidays edition. As always, I'm joined by Mr. Monitors, Jay Rosen. Jay, welcome.
Good to be with you, Tom. Another week and more good FCPA stuff to talk about.
Indeed. So we got a lot going on, so why don't we just jump right into it. First of all, we have a happy birthday to the 2012 joint DOJ SEC guidance, which turned 5 years old this week. Perhaps we could leave this one for a little more discussion at the end. But I would just note that it was the first document which formalized the 10 hallmarks of an effective compliance program, which I believe is if not one of the top compliance protocols, compliance program protocols literally in the world. So maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. And then there's one I think that's a little closer, nearer and dearer to your heart that you've had some experience with. So why don't you tell us about Wal-Mart?
Sure. So FCPA blog, as well as Henry Cutter in the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance Journal, said that Wal-Mart has finally got enough clarity as to where things are going with their settlement, and they've put aside a reserve of $283 million. So when you couple that to approximately the $800 million that they've spent already to come up with the world's best compliance program, I think it bodes as a very good result for the company, and it really does pale in comparison with what happened when this investigation started back in 2011 and 2012. The pundits were out there saying this was going to be, a $1 billion plus settlement, and that there was a lot of smoke. And the question is, we're now 6 years later. Was there any fire? Was there any there? And there's a big difference from, if you want to figure out that 283 reserve, I think does include some ethics and compliance and legal costs for the fourth quarter of this year. So maybe if it's somewhere there between $200 to $250 million, we're talking at least, 75% reduction in what the marketplace was initially respecting. What are your thoughts on that, Tom?
So a couple, Jay. First of all, any figure that Wal-Mart pays needs to be considered in connection with their overall spend on the investigation and remediation, which I believe now is north of $900 million. So whether this reservation of $283 million, which we assume is in large part for fine and penalty, is the Department of Justice recognizing really the just yeoman's and excellent work that Wal-Mart has done to bring their compliance program up to speed, is not known at this time, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me if it is. Two, we don't know if there's going to be a monitor required or not. So that's always a topical issue of whether or not a monitor will be required. But the third is the Wal-Mart case largely turned on payments, or from what we know today, turned on payments around obtaining licenses and permits. That was in large part, the underlying facts in the Avon case. And when you have a FCPA action based upon permits, licenses, the fines tend to be smaller. So this 283, whatever the amount reserved for the fine and penalty, would be consistent with what we've seen in the past in terms of fines for licenses and permits, as opposed to bags of cash across the border to garner contracts. So a lot going on that we're speculating on, and of course we don't know the answers to these, but we'll just have to wait and see where it might go. But it's been a long time coming, certainly one that we've been waiting on. With this reservation of $283 million, I would have to assume that we were going to have a final settlement by the end of the year, and we'll just have to see where it all shakes out, Jay. So next up,
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, next we've got I thought a really interesting set of facts, because it's not a case. And it's something that Matt Kelly wrote about on radical compliance involving a company called Cardinal Health. And he and I did a podcast on it, Jay. Matt ended up writing 2 blog posts on it, and I wrote a blog post on it because it was a situation where an activist shareholder, in this case the Teamsters International Brotherhood, was seeking to have a CEO who was also the chairman of the board, divested of his role as chairman of the board. And as part of the reason for that, it cited to the chief compliance officer, Mr. Morford, of the famous Morford memo that you have spoken about on another setting, in another context. And in Cardinal Health, Mr. Morford was both the general counsel and chief compliance officer. He received a discretionary bonus at the end of the year when the company did not meet the financial metrics which would have generated a discretionary bonus for him. And the Teamsters complained that he was being given a bonus when it was not clear that the compliance component of the company had been effective in stopping overzealous sales of opioid pills, which led to literally millions of dollars in fines, penalties, and litigation settlements by Cardinal Health. So as general counsel, Mr. Morford's role, of course, is to protect the company, which he did through the settlement of these lawsuits. As the chief compliance officer, his role is to prevent, detect, and remediate any problems that have come up. and it was pretty clear that the compliance program around opioid sales was not effective. So the company on its own, the CEO announced his retirement, I think, and so the whole structural issue kind of went away. But I found it really interesting that this is the first time we'd had not CEO compensation, but I thought something pointing to the structure of the CCO GC role, and it may portend a discussion by activist shareholders about whether or who the CCO should report to, and should there be a separate reporting line and indeed separate compliance department. So Matt and I spent some time on it. I've linked to all of that in the show notes, and I would encourage the compliance practitioners out there to consider the corporate governance issues of compliance for their organizations. We've got the start of the first FIFA trial, Jay, and it has just been a fascinating case to start with. Interestingly, the English newspapers have really gone into deep depth in reporting on this. It hasn't been as prominent in the U.S. press. Nevertheless, I think Sam Rubenfeld wrote about it in the Wall Street Journal and Compliance report. And in that case, first of all, we had threats to jurors, similar to threats we'd had in mafia trials. So the jurors are anonymous. That's very unusual in a non-mafia trial, although this is a criminal trial. Second of all, we've had direct threats against witnesses by defendants. So that's usually not seen in a non-mafia trial. And then finally, and perhaps for the compliance practitioner, most interesting or troubling, depending on your perspective, was a cooperating witness from the witness stand said that Fox Sports had paid bribes to secure television contracts in South America. Now, it was unclear if this Fox Sports was the Fox Sports here in the United States, whether it was a Fox Sports subsidiary or even company named Fox Sports outside the United States. But and Fox Sports, I think Fox News vehemently denied that it had ever paid any bribes. But when you have your name bandied in a criminal trial and the amount alleged to have paid, I think, is in excess of $100 million, that's certainly something that gets people's attention. So a lot going on when the FIFA trial, and this is one that is going to be fascinating to follow.
Now, two quick questions for you to educate me. Has there already been some FIFA trials elsewhere in the world, or is this the first one?
So this is the first one. We've had some guilty pleas, but we've had no trials.
Okay. And the other interesting thing, I'm sure it doesn't help Fox Sports' name to be involved with any potential bribery here, and I'm sure that doesn't help them in either their attempted acquisition of Sky Satellite Broadcasting, and furthermore, the company, as we've discussed in another podcast, is now in play. So I'm wondering if that is also leading to any of those other events for Fox.
All good questions, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. So
tell us what's on Mike Volkov's mind. He's got a 4-part series that he wrote about this week.
He did, and as always, it was great writing by Mike, and he looked at putting ethics back into corporate culture. That's one of the things, Jay, that we're hearing more and more. Certainly Wei Chin is talking quite a bit about it on her public speaking engagements. And Mike takes a look at it from the compliance perspective and gives some specific tips about how you can incorporate ethics back into your organization. And I would just note that with the various types of reputational risks that we've seen gone to the fore, we just talked about Fox Sports. In another setting, we talked about the Paradise Papers. We've had other issues around reputation that are becoming as damaging to corporations as fines and penalties. So this new emphasis on ethics and having an ethical culture is something that I certainly applaud, And I think we're going to see more of this going forward.
Good stuff. Today you had your daily blog come up, and it's about using movie clips to expand your compliance classroom. And you had an opportunity to speak to my friends Marc and Bryan Belknap at Resonate Pictures. So what did you write about this morning, Tom?
So Marc and Bryan are two of the principals at Resonate Pictures, and you kindly introduced me to them. They have a company that does compliance and safety training for corporations, and they use movie clips to help illustrate their points. They both come out of Hollywood background, as do you. So they have also recently produced an ebook which specifically talks about this technique. So I interviewed them for a podcast. It'll come up in a couple of weeks. And it was a fascinating interview where they talked about using movie clips and how to do it, how to help engage employees. They talked a lot about, I think, things that would be very familiar to you, Jay, from a former screenwriter perspective and from a former movie insider perspective. How do you really grab the audience? How do you engage them? How do you make them care about characters? How do you make them? How do you use conflict to help drive a story? And they bring all of this to compliance training. And the unexpected line that the money shot, if I could put it that way, was from Marc when he said, "This helps you expand your classroom." And I was really taken by that, because it really does allow you to expand your classroom and expand your training, expand your communication. It dovetails very nicely into my 1-month podcast series this month of 1 month to a more effective compliance program, where I'm looking at 360 degrees of communication to enhance your compliance program. And that's exactly what expanding your compliance classroom is. So, shout out to Marc for the money shot. I'm going to be using that line for a long time. Because I think it really encapsulates not only what Resonate Pictures does, but also what you really want to do in your compliance training.
And, one of the things that we hear people speak about is just-in-time delivery of compliance messages. And we've talked about before how you could potentially leverage the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence to do this. But my takeaway from what Marc and Bryan have done is, like, when you see this scene from, I believe is the movie called Up in the Air, the one with George Clooney where he's trying to get all his miles?
Right.
And there's a scene where he has to decide how he fills out his T&E report. So every time you see that in the movie, it's almost you get a repetition of, okay, I'm going to associate this George Clooney scene with filling out my T&E, and every time you see that movie, that message gets reinforced. So I think it's a pretty brilliant way to go about doing this.
Next, we had another trial this week, Jay, corruption trial in the United States. Not related to the FCPA directly, but with New Jersey Senator Bob Menedez. And a hung jury occurred, and mistrial was declared by the court. And this was one of yet another setback from of corruption trials after the reversal of the corruption conviction of the governor of Virginia by the U.S. Supreme Court. So the bottom line is that unless there is literally a bag of cash passed across to a politician where the politician says, for this bag of cash, I will do for you or perform for you X, there's probably never going to be another successful corruption prosecution in the United States. And I don't know if that's what the Supreme Court intended, but that's certainly been the effect of the cases since then. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it's interesting that we got a hung jury, but Menendez's team is, pointing to this as a complete victory. And Tom, I definitely agree with you that, with their inability to prosecute this case, we're going to get a little bit of an effect from our favorite book, The Chicken Shit Club, and I don't think the DOJ is going to, follow cases like this in the future, unless, to your point, that there is that bag of cash that they can find and really take a case that they're going to be able to make stick. Next, we've got up whistleblower bounty awards, and I think there's some positive information that you found in the National Law Review. What did they have to say on this subject?
So there was an article by Jason Zuckerman from the Zuckerman Law Firm, which indicated the 2017 annual report of the whistleblower revealed that the program has brought in nearly $1 billion in monetary sanctions from wrongdoers, including $671 million of disgorgement from ill-gotten gain. And in 2017, there were over 4,400 tips to the whistleblower hotline, which is almost 50% above what was provided back in 2012. So the looks like $221 million paid out in whistleblower awards at the end of the fiscal year, and the whistleblower program is going strong. So hopefully this will be something that will continue as it benefits the Securities and Exchange Commission and the greater U.S. public going forward.
And to refresh me and our listeners, is this the whistleblower that was part of Dodd-Frank, or this is a separate whistleblower law?
No, this is the whistleblower law that came about from Dodd-Frank. So, it's relatively new as these things go, and it's been a great success.
And we haven't heard any further rumblings. I know Matt tends to watch this pretty carefully for us, but I think initially the president was talking about wanting to dismantle Dodd-Frank, but I would think this would give him pause to do that with the successful results of these whistleblower awards.
Well, I'm not sure that this was a part of the Dodd-Frank law he was talking about. I think he was more focused on access to capital. But with these sorts of numbers, it would be something that I think the SEC would be loath to give up. Right.
So this month, you've been talking about a 360-degree view of communications. How's the podcast going?
So it's going well. We loaded up episode 13 today. We're we're halfway through the month. And it's been a fascinating exploration of communications and how to be more effective in a 360-degree approach. Also, Jay, I was extraordinarily pleased when we were able to, and I say we, and Jonathan Armstrong and Matt Kelly, yourself and myself, were able to put together an ebook on our reflections of everything compliance at the recently concluded SCCE 2017 Compliance and Ethics Institute. The ebook is available for free on multiple sites, including JD Supra, including affiliated monitors, which we'll link to it. If you have any interest in kind of what went on at SCCE, we all took a look at it from our different perspectives, and I think it's been well received so far. It was released this week, and look forward to having more folks download it and comment for us.
Well, I know that Sidel Rosen, a.k.a. Jay's mom, has been one of the first downloaders, and if she could get a digital signature from Tom Fox on her copy, she would be most happy.
Well, I'll see what I can do. So, are you going to have a holiday for us, Jay, of the Rosen Weekend Report?
I'm thinking I might do a little bit of repurposing and put together an article based on our conversation that will appear next week on Everything Compliance, where we are taking a look at the with the monitors that have become front and center in Wall Street Journal and Global Investigations Review, in addition to some remarks from Rod Rosenstein. So I think I'm going to take a look at the the state of monitoring and what different people within the administration are proposing for ways to make the program stronger and more transparent.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. So we will be off next week enjoying our Turkey Day and Turkey Days thereafter. So, Jay, do you think you can give us a 2-week goodbye to our listeners?
Sure. On behalf of Tom Fox and myself, Jay Rosen, we'd like to thank you for joining us for the Home for the Holidays edition of This Week in FCPA for the week ending November 17th, 2017. And we hope you have great holidays with your families, watch some football, and we look forward to speaking to you in 2 weeks.
Hello again, this is Tom Fox, and I'd like to thank you again for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. The FCPA Compliance Report is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Please note that we will not be podcasting or posting a podcast next week on the 24th, so we return on December 1st, 2017. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the only weekly wrap-up of all things ethics and compliance related. Also, if you have any questions, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. You can email Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. This is Tom Fox. Thank you again for listening to episode 77 of This Week in FCPA.